Hi, Norman Goldman here. Thanks for being with me on the video version of the Norman Goldman Show. I want to spend a moment with you on state government and federal government. When the United States first started, we started with the Constitution. In those days, in the 1780s, the states had all the power. The federal government had very little power. The states realized that that wasn't working. So the states all got together and they gave up some of their power to the new United States government. They gave up the power of a post office. There's no Pennsylvania post office. There's no Texas post office. There's only the United States post office. That's because the states said we want to do it that way. The states gave up the power to run their own bankruptcy courts. There's no California bankruptcy court. There's the United States bankruptcy court. It's to give commerce, to give business a uniform set of rules around the country for bankruptcy purposes. And the states gave up their power to do international relations. The state of California, where I live, cannot negotiate a nuclear arms treaty with Russia. Only the United States government can. It's because the states said, we're going to give up some of our powers to the new United States government to work on behalf of all of us. But the United States government, under the Constitution, was designed to be a government of limited powers. Now, what that has done is to create kind of two parallel systems of government. And a lot of people get confused that way, and it's understandable. Each state is kind of like a miniature United States government. California, for example, has a governor. He's like a president. And we have a state legislature. We have a lower house, the Assembly, and an upper house, the state Senate. If you look at the United States government in Washington, D.C., there's a president, there's a House of Representatives, and the United States Senate. Every state except for one, Nebraska, that doesn't have this system. I'll get to Nebraska in a second. And what the states do is a lot of the stuff that affects our lives. States pave the roads. States deal with garbage collection. States deal with animal control. States deal with divorce. States deal with the highway patrol, right? Speeding on the roads. There is no national highway patrol. I've never been pulled over by the Federal Highway Patrol because there is none. The federal government does those things that were assigned to it, like run the post office, run the bankruptcy courts, run international foreign relations, that kind of thing. So there are two parallel systems because that's the way we set it up. It's called federalism. Now, I mentioned Nebraska a second ago. They have what's called a unicameral legislature. Uni meaning one, right? Unicameral, meaning their state legislature is just one house. They have a governor and they have a state house, and it's nonpartisan. All the other 49 states have two houses and a governor. So understand that when you're starting to think about government, the first thing you should do, the very first thing, is split off federal or state. When you hear Washington, D.C., automatically federal government. When you hear United States Senator, automatically federal government. When you hear U.S. House of Representatives, automatically federal government. Each state designs its own government its own way, but all of them have a governor and a state House of Representatives and a state Senate. We haven't even started talking about the counties and cities. We'll do that another time. Thanks for being with me on the video version of the Norman Goldman Show.
This is the video for the reading The Great State. Make sure you have a pen, pencil, or highlighter ready so you can mark the text as we go through it. The Great State. State government. Sound familiar? State governments work almost exactly like the federal government. There are three branches of government: an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. At the state level, the head of the executive branch is called the governor. Every state except one has a bicameral legislature, meaning that the legislature is made up of two chambers. Remember, two parts. In most states, those chambers are called the Senate House of Representatives. A state's judicial branch normally includes a high court, often called the Supreme Court, and a system of lower courts. These lower courts include trial courts and appeal courts. A state's three branches interact just like the three branches at the federal level. The purpose of having three branches is to balance power so that no one branch or person becomes too powerful. The state's legislature passes laws. A state's governor can veto laws that are passed, and a state's high court has the power to decide whether state laws violates the state constitution. So pretty much three branches do the exact same thing that the federal government. So what I want you to do is to highlight, underline, or circle what bicameral means, which remember means two chambers. That's because the legislative branch has two parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And then I want you to underline or highlight the sentence that explains what is the purpose of having three different branches. The state legislative branch. The state legislature is the state's lawmaking body. The state's legislators are the state's lawmakers. Each state is divided into legislative districts that contain roughly the same number of citizens. Citizens in each district elect representatives to serve in the state legislature. That means the state legislature represents the citizens who live in their district. This way, the interests of the people in different parts of the state can be represented when the state laws are being considered. So what they're saying is that there's one legislator, so one lawmaker, who represents different districts around the state. Now, on the right-hand side of the page, I want you to write what the purpose of the legislative branch, the state's legislative branch, is. The state executive branch. The head of the state's executive branch is the state governor. The governor is like the president of the state and has similar powers, such as the power to veto bills passed by state legislature. A state's executive branch also includes many departments. States usually have their own departments of education, transportation, health, and other services. These departments carry out the laws passed by the state's legislature. So I know we went over what the governor was yesterday. So on the left-hand side, I want you to write what is the purpose of the state executive branch. So what is the purpose of the governor? Like, what is their main job? The state judicial branch. At the state level, like the federal level, cases start in a trial court. In many states, the trial court level is called the superior court. States also have appeals courts where people can fight a trial court's ruling, and of course, every state has a high court. A state's high court reviews the decision made by lower courts, supervises other courts, and interprets the state constitution as it applies to the law. State judicial branches also include a level of courts below the trial courts. These courts handle the thousands of smaller issues that come up every day, such as traffic tickets and minor crimes called misdemeanors. So the judicial branch includes all the courts, all the way down from traffic court, all the way up to the Supreme Court for the state. So I want you to write what the purpose of the judicial branch is, or the purposes of the judicial branch on the left-hand side. State laws. The state legislature is a state lawmaking body, but in all states, the law of the land is the state constitution. Just like the U.S. Constitution, a state's constitution describes how the state's government must operate. It may also include other laws, such as requiring a free education for state citizens. In addition to the state constitution and the state legislative branch, there are usually other ways the laws can be made in a state. In many states, the initiative process allows citizens to draft laws they would like to see adopted. If citizens collect enough signatures, the law will be placed on the ballot for the state's citizens to vote on. The referendum process works the same way, but is used to let citizens vote on the law already passed by state legislature. However, a state law is adopted, the law only applies inside that state. So, unlike at the federal government, where the lawmakers are the legislative branch, the ones we voted and elected to represent us, and they're just making laws, in states, there's a thing called an initiative, where if the lawmakers aren't passing the law we want, you can get enough signatures, so a person can write out a law, get enough people to sign, and if enough people sign that initiative, it goes on the ballot, and everyone in that state will vote. If everyone in that state votes, and it gets passed, then it becomes a state law. So in states, the citizens can actually make their own laws without the legislative branch. So I want you to go and underline or highlight what an initiative is and referendum. And the referendum is pretty much the same thing, but it's a way that we can vote to see if we like the law. So if they pass a law we don't like, we can do a referendum, the citizens will vote, and if they vote against it, they'll take that law away. Services. State governments provide many services to state citizens. These include things like police, fire safety, child protective services, roads, schools, and parks. One of the biggest services is maintaining the state's infrastructure. The basic support structures that serve a geographic area, such as transportation, communication, and power systems. All of these services cost money and are generally paid for with taxes collected from the citizens. Usually, however, states cannot afford to provide all the services citizens need. Very often, states look to the federal government for help. The federal government gives states money in forms of grants, which are sums of money designated for a certain purpose, such as improving an airport or providing health care to low-income households. So, if the state can't afford everything that needs to be fixed inside their state, they can get money from the federal government, the big United States government, and they will grant them the money. They give them a grant. But when you get a grant, it can only be used for what it says. So they're not just giving them a bunch of money and telling them to go spend it. They're saying, I'm going to give you this many $1 million for you to work on that road or that hospital. Regulations equal rules. State governments also protect citizens by regulating or making rules about many activities. Doctors, dentists, accountants, builders, barbers, and many other professionals must be certified by state agencies. State and local governments enforce building codes that specify exactly how buildings must be constructed. They conduct food safety inspections at restaurants, check to make sure gasoline pumps are accurate, and administer tests to people seeking a driver's license. The state agencies that carry out these regulations are almost always part of the state executive branch. So, because remember we said the executive branch, their job is to enforce the laws, to make people are, following the laws and being safe. So part of how they do that is they have departments and they have a lot of agencies, and these agencies go out there and they're kind of maintaining and checking on the people all the time. They're going into restaurants and making sure it's healthy so that the citizens in that area aren't getting sick if they eat there. Also, teachers need to be certified by the state. You go through a certification process with background checks and everything, and they keep monitoring them because since you're working for the state, you're teaching citizens in the state, they need to make sure that you have, trustworthy people in those positions. So the state does a lot of other jobs besides just building roads. Every department, when you go down and get your driver's license, that is a service being provided by the state, and it's being regulated because, they're making sure you know how to drive, you know the rules, and you're the proper age. Local governments. Local governments, such as cities and counties, get their power from state government. The state decides what services cities and counties are responsible for providing and what kind of laws cities and counties are allowed to make. Because local governments are the closest to the citizens, often they are the ones that can most easily provide services. Some services, such as schools, libraries, police, water, and trash collection, are usually controlled at the local level. Even so, local governments must follow both state and federal laws when providing these services. So it would be really difficult for the state of Florida's government, which is up in Tallahassee, to give all of these services and all this regulating and all these agencies controlling all these different things that we've read about for the entire state. So a good way that they do it is they allow the cities to have power. They give some of that power down to the city, and they get the power, to police their own area, but they got to follow and enforce state laws. They provide water to the people. Decide what time schools are going to start. Depending on what the citizens in that town need. What best serves their population. So I want you to, on the bottom of the page here, I want you to write the reason why the state governments give local governments power.